All right, the Finance Minister's press conference is currently ongoing, and there are several measures that she's already announced with regard to the exports and the housing sector. We'd like to focus on the housing sector first, within which there is a special fund that's going to be created by the government. But to get a little more clarity on this and how this is likely to impact the space, I'm joined now by HDFC's Vice Chairman and CEO, Keki Mistry. He's going to be speaking to us on the phone line. Thank you so much, Mr. Mistry, for joining us. Bloomberg Quint's Managing Editor, Menika Doshi, is also joining me on the phone line to take the conversation forward. Over to you, Menika.
Alex, thanks very much for that. Significant announcements being made by the Finance Minister here to deal with an especially sticky problem, and that of stalled building projects or housing projects. Mr. Mistry, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. I think the special window is something that the industry has been discussing and maybe even demanding, and the Finance Minister has lent, a generous ear. What do you make of the primary announcement before we get into the details?
Well, I think there are two important announcements on housing. One is on the external commercial borrowing.
Yes.
And the other is on the setting up of the fund. Now, there are a number of projects, huge number of projects, which are stuck, as we know, which are stuck for last mile funding, where 60, 70, 80% of the project has got done, and then the developer, for whatever reason, has run short of money and therefore is not able to complete the project. So a establishment of a fund like this, which is going to be professionally managed and which would identify these kind of projects which are stuck and would put in money into these projects, is very, very definitely a very welcome step. So it should, to a great extent, alleviate the problem that some of the stuck projects are having. The process needs to be expedited, which I'm sure it will get done. And the money needs to be put out as soon as possible, because my fear is that when a project is stuck, it is stuck because of lack of funding. Now, if it is stuck because of lack of funding, and technically if 3 installments don't get paid to the bank which has lent money for the project, the loan gets classified as a non-performing loan. And if it gets classified as a non-performing loan, my understanding is that money from this project, this fund, will not be available. So I think that is something we need to look at.
Mr. Mistry, I think a couple of questions on how you've assessed or understood what the Finance Minister has announced with particular reference to this fund that we're discussing. We'll get to the ECB matter in just a bit. But when she means last mile funding, I think she suggested projects that have been funded up to 60% and the rest which is yet not either available in the marketplace or the builder or the developer is having some trouble. Right. Is that how you understood it as well? So where the remaining portion is 40%?
Yeah, that's the way I understood it. The way I understood it is that 60% of the project has got completed. The last mile funding is required to complete the balance. Oh. Now, there'll be lots of projects where not just 60, 70, 75% is completed.
And so she's also referenced the fact that these would be non-NPA as well as non-NCLT projects, non-NCLT being those that have not been admitted to insolvency resolution proceedings. My point being that I can understand. You don't want to, as a government, interfere with a judicial proceeding that's ongoing in the IBC case. But when the reference is to non-NPA, could that, in a sense, limit the number of projects that might get assistance from such a fund?
My sense is we'll have to wait for the guidelines to come to understand what is meant when the Finance Minister said non-NPA, because an NPA is a technical thing. If a developer has been unable to pay 3 monthly installments, the loan gets classified as a non-performing loan or an NPA. So if it gets classified as a non-performing loan, then based on what the Finance Minister said, the funds will not be available from this fund which has got created. Money will not be available from this fund which has got created. But we'll have to understand what definition is being prescribed to the word NPA by which I'm sure will get clarified in the rules. It cannot just be a technical NPA. I can understand, as you said, that if a case has gone to NCLT, then let the legal process take over. But just because 3 installments have not got paid because the developer has run short of money, if those kind of cases also will not be eligible for this kind of funding, then we'll be restricting the number of projects that could get covered under the scheme.
That was my apprehension as well. The fund size at this point has been announced to be 10,000 crores to be contributed by the government of India, and roughly same amount from outside investors is what the finance ministry said. These outside investors could range from LIC to other private sector institutions, including sovereign funds. So I assume that they're also looking at maybe international contribution to this fund. So first, your comment on the number. We're looking at a fund that would range from 10 to 20,000 crores. Is that sufficient? And secondly, would institutions like HDFC, etc., be participant or willing to participate in a fund of this nature?
Well, first of all, to answer the second part first, if as the fund is going to be professionally managed and professionally run, we would probably look at making some contribution. What amount and all is something we need to think through, but we'd be happy to make some contribution. That's the first part. The second part is, your first question was what?
On the amount, sir, that is ranging between 10,000 crores to 20,000 crores.
If you get a fund of 10,000 crores and if you use a 0.3 leverage, you're looking at 0.3, 0.4 leverage, you're looking at about 14,000 crores, which is decent money. So I think that can go a long way in putting money into a lot of these kind of projects. So I think that's a good sum of money.
So if I can understand then, the overall impact of, let's say, I think they're saying 10,000 crores contributed by government. They're hopeful of a similar amount coming in from the private sector and external investors.
My understanding was 10,000, which includes half participation by the private sector and half by the public.
I'm reading from the point on the slide that the government actually displayed. I think the sentence there says fund size 10,000 crores to be contributed by government of India and roughly same amount from outside investors. So I think they're aiming for a 10 to 20,000 crore rupee fund. And then, like as you pointed out, there would be some leverage that's possible. So we're looking in the region of maybe say 10 to 24,000 crores.
That is decent money. Very decent money.
If you can give us your assessment of the current problem that the real estate sector, especially the housing sector, is facing. And let's remember that this fund is only going to work for projects in affordable and middle income categories. The government estimated such units to be impacted by stalled construction to be in the region of about 3.5 lakh units. What is your understanding of the sort of the wide impact of a fund of this nature?
Well, there'll be a number of projects where the last mile funding that is required is very, very small. It could be as small as 30 crores, 50 crores, 80 crores, 100 crores. Those kind of sums we are talking of. So if you're talking of a fund size which can run up to 20,000 crores, you're talking of a lot of projects, a huge number of projects which can get covered.
And you believe this is, this solution in terms of size, scope, scale, the fact that they hope it will be professionally managed, etc., will be a big palliative for the real estate sector right now, which is suffering from a variety of different problems?
I would certainly say this would be a huge boost to the real estate sector. However, I would add one more bit that we need some clarity on what the finance minister meant by saying that this would not apply to NPAs. Because my sense is that if a project is stalled, then it is stalled because of lack of liquidity. And if it is stalled because of lack of liquidity, then the project would not have been able to pay off the loans that were taken for the project on time, which therefore means that the loan could technically become an NPL. Now, every NPL loan doesn't get taken to NCLT.
Right.
Or doesn't get taken for, insolvency.
So your point being that, if they rule out all those projects that have been technically qualified as NPA, then the number of projects that can benefit from a fund like this will be considerably reduced.
I don't know about considerably reduced, but it would be reduced. I will not be able to quantify how much it will be reduced, but it would get reduced. But Menka, we have to understand that I'm sure the definition of NPA as one would probably read from the scheme might be a little different from what we are referring to. So let's wait for the judgment.
Okay, fair enough. The second point that the government raised was the issue of external commercial borrowing.
Yeah.
They said these guidelines would be relaxed to facilitate financing of home buyers who are eligible under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana.
Yeah, that's correct.
This is to be done in consultation with RBI, and this is in addition to the existing norms for ECB for affordable housing. So what is the current extant norms for ECB for housing, and what impact or change will this bring in?
Well, the current norms, as far as I can, speaking off the cuff, is that the money which is raised from an external commercial borrowing, the end use of that money from the lender's perspective is that the money can be used only for projects where more than 50% of the area which is under construction is of an area less than 60 square meters. Now, under the PMAY scheme, that number, PMA has a number of sub-schemes within it, one of which is CLSS. That's Credit Linked Subsidy Scheme. Under the Credit Linked Subsidy Scheme, the funding would be available even for projects where the area of the dwelling unit is up to 200 square meters. So we are talking of 2,000 square feet. So it can be reasonably substantial, reasonably large projects, which are large as in relatively larger sized apartments, which also will get the benefit of the external commercial borrowing.
Will this mean a considerable liquidity relief of sorts for developers, the ability to actually go out and borrow externally?
I don't know whether, I think my sense is it will be difficult for many borrowers to go to the external market and borrow money, but the housing finance companies or the banks should be able to do that and lend money to these projects.
Okay. Any idea, sir, on what could be the potential, in terms of the additional liquidity that could come in because of such relaxation on the ECB guidelines front?
I mean, I'm sure these things will get quantified over time, but it can be quite large because international funding is available now. The markets are wide open. Ability to borrow money is there with companies. And there is plenty of liquidity in the overseas markets, and the rates are pretty attractive.
So would it encourage, let's say, I mean, I know that HDFC may not, necessarily be looking for this as one source of capital.
We would look for it. Of
would
course
you?
We would look
Yeah,
for
okay.
it.
So at HDFC as well, you would be able to use this relaxation in ECB guidelines to fund affordable housing schemes, is it?
That's right.
Okay. One final last word on housing I wanted your view on. This has to do with the house building advance that is available to government employees, and I think that the finance minister said that the interest rate on this will be lowered and linked with 10-year GSEC yields so as to encourage more government, officials and employees to buy new houses. Again, a considerable sort of demand push to the market?
Yeah, as far as the government employees are concerned, yes, it brings down interest rates. So, yes, it would be a boost. But I think the two more impactful announcements are the fund and the 10,000 crore fund as well as the ECB. But even this would be a big help to the government employees.
Yeah. Mr. Mistry, there have been several issues, that are pending in front of the real estate industry right now, especially the housing end of it all. And to your assessment, how many of the problems have been resolved by these two big announcements that you have detailed today? What is yet left to do that might be on the critical list?
Well, I guess one of the things which would be there is this issue of NPAs. So if a project has run into financial difficulty as a result of which it gets classified as a non-performing loan, and if a bank another bank or the same bank, whoever it is, wants to lend money for that project, that bank will not be able to classify that loan as the new money that is given as a performing loan. It will have to be classified as a non-performing loan from day one, which therefore means that very few people would be willing to lend money to a stress project. But now that stress project will get money by way of funding from the fund rather than from the banking system.
No, that's fine. I'm saying what is yet left to do? What would you like for the government to now focus on to alleviate some of the other, parts of the real estate industry that have, been facing both liquidity issues and legal issues?
I think this is a step in the right direction. It will go to a great extent in alleviating some of the problems. Sentiments in the economy determine people's willingness to buy houses. We have seen that in the affordable housing segment, the demand is strong and continues to remain strong.
All right, Ms. Mistry, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us this afternoon. Keki Mistry of HDFC there, Alex, detailing the beneficial impact of two critical announcements on the housing front. I think this fund that many home buyers and their representatives have also been talking about in an effort to try and get stalled projects moving. Of course, we have to wait for the fine print on this, but also the relaxation of ECB guidelines, which was the second announcement, which, as Mr. Mistry pointed out, will help many of the home finance companies if they're looking for additional money or additional capital to raise that capital externally. But all of this applies only to affordable housing. One must caveat that.
Yes.
But that's a substantial chunk of the real estate market at this point in time, and the chunk where the demand lies, and the chunk where the buyers are feeling the maximum pain.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Menaka. I'm going to take this conversation forward a little bit, also to get the perspective from the real estate industry. And in fact, I'm joined by Anuj Puri of Anurok Property Consultants. Thanks so much, Anuj, for joining in. You probably tuned in live to the Finance Minister's press conference, and we've just had a conversation with Keki Mistry of HDFC. He points out that the two big announcements are the fund that will take care of stalled projects, and also the ECB relaxation with regard to availability of funds. I'd like to talk about the special fund first. We're talking about 10,000 crore rupees to be contributed by the government, and a further 10,000 possibly coming in from the private sector or from outside the government. You recently came out with a study of the number of stalled projects out there. That really is the biggest question. How many, in your estimation, projects will fall under the ambit of this new fund?
So I do believe is that this will be in the range of 300,000 to 350,000 dwelling units. So, interestingly, what she said after the session in the Q&A was that this is really before getting into the NCLT or the NPA. So, they're really at the edge, these projects in the affordable and mid-housing category. They haven't yet gone into becoming an NPA or an NCLT. And I think the question then was asked is, what about those projects that are in NCLT and NPA? And she very eloquently said is that we're also looking at those projects, but the immediate concern is that let's protect these assets from going into an NPA and NCLT, those that have already gone. I mean, NCLT courts are looking at it. Yet she said is that the various departments of the government have got together to see is that what do they need to do to be able to resolve the issue of those projects that have gone into the NCLT and the NPA. But the current 20,000 crores that have been put together for affordable and mid-housing segment, in my opinion, will protect between 300,000 to 350,000 dwelling units. I think it is fantastic. Really, if you were to genuinely ask me, not to the three measures that she has done, the first and the third measure, which is the ECB and the fund, is really trying to address the liquidity problem. And the second one is trying to address the demand problem. And I know that, to Mr. Mistry, you had asked, what else needs to be done. And, he was very articulate in saying is that about the NCLT or the NPA cases, there needs to be a resolution onto that. And in addition to that, I would say is perhaps on the demand side, there will need to be more things that need to be done. What the Honorable Finance Minister has done is prompted the demand from the government employees to say is that the interest rates will be equivalent to 10-year GSEC rates for their home loans, and that would certainly, the developers you will see will get attracted to a lot of government employees, and there will be schemes now coming in from private developers to try and sell their apartments to the government employees. That should prop up some demand, but I think there will be more that will need to be done on that demand side. But certainly I can tell you the point 3, which is the corpus of 20,000 crores, it should come into the market, in my opinion, in the next 9 to 12 months itself. It seems to be quite simple the way that she articulated. Obviously, we'll need to see the fine print, but it did appear to me is that as long as the project is 60% complete and not an NPA,
yes,
you should be able to come under its purview.
Anuj, so I get that, and in fact, from what I remember, what she said during the press conference, she said that the fine print will be notified very shortly, so we'll wait to understand what exactly that is. But from the face of it, and this question was also asked with regard to how the fund will put money into these stalled projects, assuming that a project qualifies. What said was that there's the possibility of equity, there's a possibility of superior debt. Can you break this down for us? How do you think this is going to work, and how will the developer then be able to pay this money back?
So, this is, I think she said 3 things. One, she said is it'll be run by professionals, which is very interesting. And she said is that it'll be people from the banking sector or the financing sector who's going to come in. Second, she said is that this is going to be an AIF category 2 fund. which really means the way that it can happen is that either they come in as pari passu equity with the developer, or they come in as a senior debt. And just in simple words, I'll say it's like a LIFO, last in and first out. So they will be the last guys who will come in and do the last mile funding, and at the time of the sale, they will be the first guys who will get the money back. And I can tell you the existing lenders will have no problem with this, because at least they will have a hope that the project is going to get completed. Developer will have no problem where there is, and the government should be entitled to come in as a savior to put in that money and say, we're going to be the first ones who are going to get out. The moment this sells, we're the first ones who get the money back. It's not a sort of a FIFO kind of a thing that the first lender who went in is the first lender who comes out. So that's the way that I feel is you're going to see the fine print with a LIFO kind of an arrangement where they will come in as the last funder to do the last mile funding, and when the project starts to sell, they'll be the first ones whose money needs to be paid out.
Anuj, just stay with us. I do want to come back to you on the ECB point, and perhaps also to get a sense as to what the inventory levels currently stand in the major markets. I'm joined now by MS Shankar, National Secretary of the Forum for People's Collective Efforts, and he's joining us on the phone line from Bangalore. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Shankar. Just want to get a sense, you heard what the Finance Minister announced with regard to the fund that will hope to really get some of these stalled projects off the ground. What is the sense in terms of the number? We're trying to understand what number of projects would qualify. The stipulation that it needs to be non-NPA and not currently under NCLT might just reduce the number substantially.
Hi, Alex. Thank you. At the outset, the FCC is thankful to Honorable Finance Minister considering our FCC vital demand of allocating of 10,000 crores and also establishing the task force. Honorable Minister has constituted a special window which will comprise the industry expert and banking expert, which meets our demand of the task force. Of course, they said this will be applicable only to the 60% project completed of middle income housing and the affordable housing. Here, there are a lot of clarity is missing. We have to wait, as the Honorable Finance Minister said, they are working out on the rules and regulations which will be out in a couple of days. We need to wait and see how are they going to, fund the 60% complete, how are they going to identify those projects, which is very important. And of course, the Finance Minister also should pitch into risk the major home buyers, especially the Amrapali and JP and United, which where the people are really, looking for some kind of, solutions by the, stress fund.
That's right,
along
Mr.
with our FPC, even these three project people, major project people also had high hopes.
Yes.
Of course, we cannot, say that the Finance Minister is hands are all tied up.
Yes.
As she very clearly said, as it is, they cannot intervene when the matter is with NCLT.
Mr. Shankar.
Anyway, we hope, as the Madam said, the discussions are all going on to consider further and some recommendations and amendments in the NCLT. We hope the Finance Minister will consider to get those projects also within to come out of the crisis.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Shankar. In fact, just to elucidate what Mr. Shankar was just pointing out, the question was raised to the Finance Minister with regard to projects that are currently under the NCLT process, and she said that these need to follow due process because resolution will come under the purview of the IBC. But we've also got Abhay Upadhyay, who is President Forum for People's Collective Efforts from and also member of the Central Advisory Council, RERA. He's joining us on the phone line. Thank you so much for joining us. Abhay, some of these issues with regard to stalled projects have been plaguing the real estate sector for quite a while. Do you think that the introduction of this fund will go a long way in reducing the stress that you're currently seeing?
Yes, 100%. What I see, I mean, it was our demand that government should create such funds, and we are thankful to the government. And you see, as per government's own admission, some 3.5 lakh units will be completed because of this fund. And they have also come out with a statement saying that this will not be only, any geographic or any particular project. It will be pan-India, though there are conditions that it should be non-NCLT, non-NPA, and those 60% complete. But in the same breath, there was also a statement from Madam that, the interministerial group is looking into those big projects. And we have to understand what this step signifies. And the important part is that government has shown its intention that it wants to clear the legacy issue which is there for last 10 years. This is a very baby step towards that. And we must welcome this and we must congratulate the government to identify this, to understand that there's a need to do something beyond just going legal. And to that extent, we must support the government. And I am sure going forward, when we see the good result coming because of this, I'm sure government will consider all those projects also, which are in NCLT or which are NPAs or which are less than 60% complete. Because, it is a very baby step, first step. And we must congratulate the government, thank the government for understanding the problem and coming out with some solution. So this is a very, very positive move. In fact, landmark decision of the government, and we must appreciate the steps taken by the government.
Okay. I understand that, Mr. Upadhyay. In fact, what she pointed out was that home buyers are currently treated as operational creditors, so perhaps that will move towards the resolution of some of these projects. I do want to go back to Anuj on this one, just to try and understand the levels of inventory. You've done several studies in the leading markets, and of course there is a stipulation that these projects need to be non-NPA and non-NCLT, but there's also an issue with regard to the demand side of it. Sales have been a little bit sticky. Inventory has been high. Can you give us a bit of a sense as to where inventory stands in the big real estate markets?
Absolutely. So, the total unsold inventory today stands at about 628,000 units. But the way that we look at unsold inventory is not inventory which is completed and unsold. This may be under construction as well. And hence the equilibrium, we believe, is at somewhere around 480,000 units. So we are at about 680,000 units of unsold, under construction and completed inventory, and we believe is that the equilibrium will be around 480,000 units. Each year, we're selling about 225,000 units. So if you look at in perspective at an India level, we're at about 12 months of excess supply. Some of the micro markets have more, some of the micro markets have less, and some of the micro markets are doing fantastically well. For like example, Hyderabad. To me, it looks like a different country itself, where there is a huge amount of demand. We continue to see the price growth in that market, and the sales as if nothing has gone wrong in the real estate sector. And yet in the NCR, when you come in, we see a lot more stress in that marketplace. I think just going back to your original question, I do feel is that some of the confidence which will get into the home buyer, that the government has recognized that there is a problem in the stalled and the incomplete projects, although they are not in the NPA category, will bring in confidence and hopefully will prop up the demand. Clearly the demand on getting on from the government employees by bringing in the interest rates equal to the GSEC for 10 years should bring in a lot more demand coming in from the PSU employees. And I'm hoping that the government will continue to prop up the demand. Just from the perspective of the viewers, they should know is that 2013, the demand was at 550,000 units. And we are really down to about 215,000 units in 2019. So over the last 6 years, we've come nearly to 50% of the demand, which really needs to prop up again.
Yes, absolutely. That's a fair point. I do want to very quickly get your view, Anuj, on the ECB announcement also, just to remind the viewers who've just tuned in. The announcement was that the ECB guidelines will be relaxed, and this is what I'm reading from the press release, to facilitate financing of home buyers who are eligible under the PMAY, which is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, in consultation with the RBI. And this is what the government expects in addition to the existing norms for ECB for affordable housing. I just want to understand, and this is something that we asked HDFC's Keki Mistry as well, and he points out that this would be a measure that would bring additional liquidity to some of these projects. How important do you think this step will be in terms of availability of funds that will come through the housing finance companies?
So, the way that I understood it, that the HFCs, the housing finance companies, will be able to avail the ECB, which was there available for them. But, that ECB was restricted with the definition of 60 square meters. After the press conference in the Q&A, it was clarified that we're now not looking at that as 60 square meters. We're looking at it as 200 square meters. I mean, you're certainly talking 2,000 square feet, which means that the purview of the ECB in the category of the affordable housing has been moved from just the PMAY 60 square meters to a 200 square meters, which brings in a lot many projects under that purview. And that is where Mr. Mistry was also pointing that there should be more liquidity, because there's now going to be more inventory on which you will be able to raise ECB if you were an HFC.
I'm just trying to understand, because some of the issues that have cropped up for the domestic industry and also for some of these small builders is the hesitancy with regard to lending to some of these companies, because you don't know what the kind of offtake is going to be. So if there is still a demand, shall we say, a sluggish demand in the real estate space, there's still going to be an issue with regard to the funding, right?
Absolutely correct. I don't think so that is going to go away. The category C developers, who were not well governed, not financially disciplined, did not take care of the customers. I don't think that the money is going to be given to those guys. I think all these measures are being done to make sure that the strong guys don't start to become weak. And whilst the consolidation is taking place, it should not happen that the strong guys start to perish. And that's where I think the three initiatives that the Honorable Finance Minister took was towards that, not necessarily bailing out the full real estate sector.
Just very quickly, and a last point now, Anuj, because I just want to get a sense. About 3 years back, if I'm not mistaken, you were talking about consolidation in the real estate space. Do you expect that that's going to pick up steam further from now? And have you seen that developing as a major trend?
I think it has picked up a lot of steam. In the last, I would say, is 1 quarter. I think it has really picked up a huge
developer.
My guess is that I think most of the consolidation will get completed by the end of this financial year.
Anuj, thanks so much for joining me on this conversation and throwing light, in fact, on all the announcements that have been made by the Finance Minister. I'm joined now by Jaksai Shah, who is National Chairman of the Confederation of Real Estate Developers Association, or CREDI. Thanks so much for joining us, Mr. Shah. I just want to get your initial thoughts. The people who've joined us so far, the experts who've joined us so far, pointed out that the announcement on the ECB relaxation with regard to affordable housing and the introduction of the fund are the two big takeaways with regard to the real estate space. How much of an impact do you see this as having?
So as a CREDI, we feel that looking to the situation, the grave situation of the CREDI, the real estate industry, I think this is not enough. I think government has just scratched the surface. We would be more happy that if ECB would be directly relaxing, the ECB to be benefited to the developers other than the FFC and the customer. The stress funds is given to the non-NP and non-NCLT project, but is not clarified when and where. And I am apprehended that if government delaying that, more or maybe new projects, there are healthy projects, maybe become weak if government is delaying that also. So we need a more clarity in timing, first of all. After all the disruption what real estate had in last couple of years, triple whammy like demonetization, RERA, GST and liquidity crunch, it was an elephant in the room. Everybody can see an elephant in the room. Why can't government can see? We need a treatment now We can't even wait up to this 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 1 month also because festival season is coming. Demand creation, why for the government servant only? Look into the economy. I think government has failed to give confidence and good sentiment to the real estate industry and housing projects also.
Mr. Shah, what you're essentially saying is that the measures that have been announced today will not really take care of the demand side of things. And you say that a lot more. What exactly do you think that the government needs to do with regard to the demand side of the real estate
problem? First of all, we have series of dialogues in last month everywhere. We told them that please remove the 45 lakh cap. What they have they put, it was not in the history since last 45-50 years. They have increased the limit of the interest benefit from 2 lakh to 3.5 lakh, but it was not cap earlier. We told them repeatedly that please remove this cap. It was not earlier. We have not seen any tangible or any quick decision for the demand creation in the speech and in budget also. So we are quite upset with today's announcement. They have just scratched the surface. They have not realized the grave situation of the real estate industry today now in India.
All right, Mr. Shah, do stay with us. In fact, I'm joined by a leading developer, Niranjan Hiranandani, or Managing Director and co-founder of the Hiranandani Group, and in fact, the President of the National Real Estate Development Council. He's joining us on the phone line. Thank you so much, Mr. Hiranandani, for joining us on the phone line. I just want to get your initial reaction to this, especially the third announcement in the real estate space that she made with regard to the fund. How is this operationally going to work? Do you think that this is going to resolve a large number of the stalled projects that are out there? There are caveats that she's added with regard to non-NPA and non-NCLT.
I think what Mr. Jagshish Shah said was very correct. I think what is missing is the fact that it hasn't been as comprehensive and complete as we would have wanted it to be. We are only happy that they have recognized the fact that this industry is in difficulty and does need a lot of intrusion into it. Let's take the question of stress funds, which Mr. Jagshish Shah just mentioned about. The stress fund is not going to be for NCLT and NPA matters, which means the entire national capital region of all the properties, including Amarpali, including Unitech, all these buildings which are there in the NCR, all of them are affected by NCLT or NPA, and hence the benefit of the stress fund will not be available for these projects. So that's the first lapse. Number two lapse, which I think is very important, is the fact that when you say and you put a rider that these stress funds will only be for affordable and middle class. When we do projects which are complete, which have studio apartments, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom. Now, if you make 10 flats out of 500 into flats which will be of 3 bedrooms, that may not be considered as middle income and affordable. So then what happens? So will you, because of those 5-10 flats which are of a larger size or which will come under higher income bracket, those will not be given? I think the riders are a bit too much which is there. ECB number 3 is only covering 0.5% of the total credit coming into industry. 99.5% of the credit comes from banks and financial institutions and NBFCs and HFCs. Now, those benefits are not being thought about, though the overall rider for giving money to NBFCs has been enhanced. But how will that flow to the developer? That is not very clear except to the extent of the stress fund. So what happens to the normal borrowing for new projects that are going to be done? So I think I congratulate the finance minister for making a beginning, but I don't think it's a complete story with doing it. And the last point I want to state is that the demand creation side has only taken into consideration of government servants who are already benefited with the 7th Pay Commission. They are further benefited by home loans, which I think is a very good thing that has happened. But what happens to the rest of the country? What about demand creation from the rest of the economy is something which is still at a very large gap. So I think a good beginning has been made by the government. But as Shah has just mentioned over here, that it is grossly inadequate to meet the needs of the entire industry. And there is still gaps in what you did. The last, I'm going to repeat what Jaxi said, that 45 lakhs amount which had been there is something which was not needed and not proper. Not a single building in the Mumbai region, for example, is going to be benefited under the circumstance with the stress fund, because they all exceed this 45 lakhs limit. So I think there's a lot to be done to tweak whatever has been done or to enhance it, which I think will take to the good level. But we thank the government to recognize it and at least make a beginning.
So I just want to point out to the viewers who are not familiar with what you're referring to, this is an announcement that was made in the budget. The additional deduction of up to 1.5 lakh for interest paid on loans borrowed up to the 31st of March 2020 for a purchase of a house that is valued up to 45 lakh rupees. So this is a provision that was introduced in the budget for this year. Sir, I just want to ask you, and we're trying to get an estimate, of course the numbers will come out over the next few weeks and months, of the number of units. The finance minister spoke about 3 to 3.5 lakh housing units that will be impacted or potentially impacted by this fund. Do you think that the number is that significant?
See, the point is very simple. We know that the government in affordable housing scheme, as the housing minister has also announced, has announced 1.1 crore houses in the affordable housing scheme. But we still know that there are a large number of schemes all over the country which are in stressed and difficulty situation. And there is a demand creation required for the rest of the economy in terms of the real estate business and the multiplier effect and employment effect, which is done by real estate. So when you say that there is a benefit which is coming to X number of houses, the answer is correct. We are not disputing that. But is it enough? It's like saying that I've got cancer and I want to take crocin. Is crocin enough to cure cancer? So what Jaxi is saying just now, Mr. Jaxi Shah, is saying just now is it adequate enough to solve the issue of the real estate market and the multiplier effect we thought that would be generated? The answer is not enough.
Okay, so I just want to just close that point here, sir. You're saying that the demand scenario is actually quite bleak at the moment. Very quick estimation as to what you expect from the festival season. Do you see any pickup whatsoever?
No, there will be a benefit. There is nothing that it's not going to benefit. All the things which he has stated is positive and perfect, but it's not enough. That is what I'm saying.
Enough. Thank you so much, Mr. Hiranandani, for joining us today. I do want to get one more perspective from the real estate space. I'm joined by Dhaval Ajmera, who is Director of Ajmera Realty, who's joining us on the phone line. Thank you so much, Dhaval, for joining me right now. I'm guessing that you've already heard what the Finance Minister had to say, and really the point that has been made and stressed upon by the representatives, shall I say, of the industry that you represent is that this is not enough to really take care of the demand side of things that the industry was really clamoring for. Do you hold true to that, or do you hold with that view?
Yes, to an extent. I feel, firstly, I feel that, this is the signs of, purely impacting on or even giving measures for the real estate sector is a positive sign. But honestly, with the way the market is, it is eventually not enough right now to just give a general perspective, but to have it a more specific and a measurable item is what is, I think, is very, very important in today's scenario. So maybe certain measures as which was being announced, but if had it been announced, like if there is an interest rate reduction of this many percentage, which would have actually boosted the economy more or the market better than just being saying that we are looking at interest rates going down.
Mr. Ajmera, I just want to get a perspective on this ECB announcement, the relaxation of the norm that potentially could allow for more funds to come through to the affordable segment. Do you think that that's going to be a significant development, and that's going to be major in terms of availability of funds?
Well, I firmly believe there are a lot of foreign funds definitely are going to come down in the future. But all these money, whichever is going to come, is going to be for the future projects and the future time. But currently, what we really need is the current perspective
and scenario for the market is, I think, which is more important. So ECB, yes, definitely is a very, very important thing, and it will definitely boost the affordable housing segment, which is the view and the line of which government is thinking. In future, it is going to be great, and it will hold a good value and a good, demand will be there. But for now, I think it is most important to gather or look after the current crisis.
Dhaval Ajmera, thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg Quint. Well, that's the perspective both from the real estate industry and in fact HDFC, who joined us a little while back, property consultant Anurok Consultants, gave you a sense of what this would mean for the real estate industry. I think the bottom line from the real estate sector is that not enough has been announced with regard to the demand side of things, and there's a lot of stress there to deal with. But we'll have to wait a little longer for the fine print to emerge. While we do, you can tune in to Bloomberg Quint, look up the website bloombergquint.com. We'll have a lot more on this subject and in fact on the announcements that were made to spur exports. So do stay tuned. There's a lot more coming up in just a short while. This is Bloomberg Quint.